We migrated to the United States from Haiti. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and we came in 1972, and I was 13 years old. So, went to New York. We lived in one room with 9 people in one room in New York. It wasn't even an apartment. It was a room, part of a building where our kitchen and our bathroom was outside of the room that 9 of us lived in. And actually, we were happy. We were happy to be in the U.S. I saw snow for the first time because I think it was in April when we came. But as I reflect on my life, I was always driven from a child to present. So in my earlier days, I went to high school in Manhattan, although I lived in Brooklyn because I didn't want to go to the regular school. I wanted to go to special school. So I attended the High School of Music and Art, which is the school in Fame, if you ever saw that movie. That was my high school. I majored in music. And upon graduation, I went from college to college, major to major, floundering for about 2 years. And then I decided to join the Marine Corps. And I spent 22 years in the Marine Corps. I went from the rank of gunnery sergeant, which is an E7, and I became an officer, and I retired as a CWO3 in 2003. So 22 years, I went at 22, and I retired at 44. I wanted to be young enough to have a second career, because what I wanted to do, I was always wanted to be in the helping profession. So as a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, I had a master's degree in counseling psychology. And so when I got out, that's what I worked in as a civilian, working with Marine sailors and families. So I did that for about 11 years. And so what took me to my current journey was the earthquake in Haiti, as you all know. I don't want to have my back to you. Was in 2010, where I think about 13,000 people actually died during that event. And I'm sitting here, sitting in North Carolina, watching it on TV, wondering, what can I do? I have to do something. I try to volunteer. I volunteer as an interpreter, but because I was in a uniform, as a civilian government service worker, I wasn't allowed to go and help. So I sat there, and I had to think, what can I do? I can't go, because I don't want to go and get in the way, because there's so many NGOs, thousands of people they just landed, and they basically were in the way of the people that were actually doing the rescuing, etc. So I decided to go back to school and put another tool in my toolbox. So I entered the International Relations program at Webster University, which is how I met Dr. Kleiner. So in the program, during my last class, it was for my thesis paper, I wanted to do it on Haiti, but the professor I was working with, he wanted me to do it on water contamination, some off-the-wall. To me, it was totally not in my plan, meaning I went into this program solely to learn how I can help Haiti. So I wanted my paper to be a working document that I can go and actually implement. So we kind of bumped heads, and I ended up dropping the class, and he actually gave me a failing grade. So during that time, I was offered to go back to Haiti, and it wasn't an accident. I'm sure everything happens for a reason. So in 2012, I walked away from a GS career level position to go and serve in Haiti, not knowing how I'm going to pay for anything, or how my bills were going to get paid, although I had my military retirement. So I left and I went to Haiti, and when I got there for the first time in about 40 years, I felt as if part of my heart that was missing all these years, growing up in the United States. I lived the American dream, but I always felt that professionals like myself is what it's going to take to help this situation, the current situation. So when I got there, I landed, and I felt like a piece of my heart just plugged in, where I felt so grounded and whole. I was like, this is it. This is where, for the rest of my life, this is my mission, my dharma, as I mentioned earlier. So there was no question that I had made the right decision, although I didn't know how it was going to unfold. So anyway, I initially wanted to go for 90 days, but I was only there for like about a week because there was nothing in place as far as infrastructure, what we were gonna do. I went with these people and they had no plan. So I realized that I would be better off back in the States helping from, from there, trying to put some things in place and then come back. So I came back to North Carolina after about a week and then went back to Webster so I can re-engage in my final class because I still needed one class to get my second master's. And so the coordinator happened to find Dr. Kleiner and he agreed to be my mentor so I can finish my final paper. And that's how we encountered. I mentioned earlier today, I was just, I had been in Haiti. This was my fourth time that I've been back and forth throughout the years between 2013 and present. In 2019, I went, in June, I was there for 3 months. I just got back in August after spending 90 days living in the orphanage, experiencing exactly what they go through. Because I think a weak mission here and there really doesn't do justice to the reality of what life is like. So I kind of voluntarily embedded myself, in the environment so I can know how I can help. Excuse me for a second. So during that 90 days, the first month, the pastor I was supposed to be working with and also two of the women who were running this orphanage that I went to, they all went back to the States the week that I arrived. So I spent about 3 weeks there with nobody to basically no guidance whatsoever, and I was on my own. And I'm like, luckily I could speak the language. I can, go ask somebody if I need something, I can ask. But it was like, what did I get myself into? But at the same time, I was living the dream that I've had my whole life, is actually being in the country and doing something, even if it's a small, it's the smallest thing. So during the first 3 weeks, I lived in this room. It was like a jail cell made out of cinder blocks. There was no, in Haiti, the windows are just open. It's just like cinder, designed bricks, and then the air goes through. But what the air is coming is like dust. So the room everything is covered with dust, and it's hot. I hardly had any electricity. We had a generator that was ran, but then when it goes out, and I'm trying to find out, okay, how do we get more gas? Nobody knows. So I'm in the dark sometimes, very little to eat other than what I had brought with me from the States. And basically, I'm asking myself, wow, where do I go from here? So during the 90 days, I tell people I was physically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually challenged because I had to really do a lot of self-searching. It was basically me and my higher power, God, whatever you call it. But my faith is where my strength comes from. So I spent a lot of time in the room that I was at. They had a bookcase with books. I couldn't carry a lot of stuff, so I didn't bring any books, and I love to read. I ended up reading about 5 books by Max Lucado. Anybody have heard of Max Lucado? No?
One person.
Max Lucado. So there were 5 of his books, and some of the titles were, hang in there. It's not about you. Carry the cross. I mean, it was as if I was getting messages where every time I started doubting, because I could go home like with a phone call, I could say, put me on the next plane, but then it would have defeated the whole purpose of, how I wanted to serve. So I survived, and a month later, the pastor came back, the teachers came back, and we actually started to get into a routine. The orphanage that I'm working with and that I was living in, they have about 100 children, and there's a school in the school from kindergarten to high school, and they follow an American homeschool program. And so when those children graduate high school, they'll receive a diploma from high school in Pennsylvania. So if they were to come to the States, etc. So during my time there, I spent time interviewing the children, basically trying to figure out what are their hopes and dreams. Because they're living in an environment where I can't even explain, what life is like. And they're content, and they're happy. And every time I want to complain about the fact that I'm sweating, I'm hot, I'm like, I look at them and it really helps put things in perspective. So many of them, they want this, they have the same needs that we have: basic food, shelter, a better life. And part of my assignment there was to assess the situation of the compound, the whole compound itself, the dorm parents, the food that they're feeding the children, the cleanliness of the compound, etc. So I spent time mentoring the dorm parents, educating them on how to correct or discipline the children without having to hit them. And talk about, as far as it's effective, it's better to communicate, and the cultural difference is enormous. So talking with the children, the same things they're identifying as things that they would want to do better were also the ones that I was identifying. Like, the ground there's broken vehicles, there's trash everywhere, it's not a conducive living condition. So part of my job was I started, initiating some processes where, okay, we're gonna clean. I put on my military hat, and we were doing field day. And I don't know if anybody's familiar. It's basically general cleanup. Once a week in the Marine Corps, you clean the barracks from top to bottom, and then you get inspected the next day. So I started, we're gonna clean on Friday, and then we're gonna inspect on Saturday. And the condition, the environment started getting better. And once they did this major cleaning, I'm listening because my room was near the playground. I can see or hear the change, where they weren't like fighting with each other. They were like laughing and singing. And it's just amazing how just a simple change in the environment, just sweeping one corner that looks cleaner than over there, makes a big difference in their way of being. So that 90 days basically solidified my commitment and my desire to continue. So I will be going back to Haiti in March. The only problem right now is you probably have heard in the news, there's been uprising for the past 2 months, at least worse than it was when I was there. We had riots, but it wasn't as bad as it is now. So there's 4 groups that are trying to overthrow the current president, who was democratically elected. So those 4 oppositions, they all have reason why this guy should go, but there's a pattern in Haiti, and that's why one of my questions was, Haiti has been independent for 215 years, yet it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and the question is why? There are so many factors, but community building to me is one of the answers, and that's what I've been doing in this particular community. And I've passed out newsletters that we published last year to give you an idea of the work that we're doing. But then, one person can't do it all. So we need volunteers, we need support, and but I also believe that it takes one person to start the process in whatever it is, like all the topics that we talked about, earlier today. You could be that one person fighting, and then sooner or later you'll have others to join you in order to make a difference. Because for me, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, serving in Haiti and determined to make a difference for the people, and especially the children, because they are the future, and that's where my focus is. And that's all I have for now. Thank you. Question. All right. The question was in Cuba. In 1994, I was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, stationed in New Jersey, working as an independent supply chief. But myself and a clerk handled the whole state of New Jersey, plus 4 offices in Philadelphia and 4 in New York. One day I came to work and I got a call from headquarters Marine Corps saying, okay, are you Joele, blah, blah, blah. Are you pregnant? No. They asked me like 2 or 3 questions, and then it says, consider yourself on standby to deploy to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So, and I'm like, nobody gets deployed on independent duty because that duty, it's only you and one person doing the job of like 4 or 5. So the order came down from headquarters Marine Corps. They needed linguists, and because it showed that I speak, French and Creole, the person was like, consider yourself on standby 48 hours, 72 hours. I was gone 48 hours. I was sitting on the dock of the Guantanamo Bay with all my gear, wondering what in the world am I doing. I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old that I had to just sign everything, all papers for my husband to handle, and I'm sitting there not knowing what I was going to do. But that experience was life-changing because I ended up working in a camp where I had about 1,400 Haitian migrants. As you probably remember, in '94, a whole bunch of Haitian refugees were coming to the United States because of political uprising.
They were called the boat people.
Right. So every day we were building new camps. So 1,400. Each camp had about 1,400. I was the 6th camp, and I was one of the senior people. But then I ended up being the senior linguist, working with an Air Force commander running the camp, and that kind of like started my whole desire to do something about Haiti. Because in that camp you have lawyers, teachers, everybody mixed together, trying to get away to find a better life. But we intercepted them in Cuba, so then they wouldn't get to Miami, so then they couldn't claim political asylum. So it was a life-changing experience as well. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
About living a good life. It's about living a true life, and it can sometimes be hard. But I think that these 2 stories, it's actually about true life, to do something ethical, which is not only about yourself, but you are working for a bigger
cause.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Getting back to the Sustainable Development Goals.